I stood by the window table when Lily said, "We're done. I'm tired of pretending." People went quiet. Cups stopped clinking. I said, "Lily, please, let's talk outside." She laughed. "Why? So you can beg without witnesses?" I felt heat rush my face. "I'm not begging. I just want to understand." "You're useless," she said loud. "No future, no money, always promising." I whispered, "I worked nights for us." She waved a hand. "For nothing. You dragged me down." I heard myself say, "I paid your rent. I sold my bike." Evan stepped closer. "Man, have some dignity." I looked at him. "Who are you two?" He smiled. "The upgrade." Lily leaned into him. "See? Confidence. Stability." I said, "I stood by you when you had nothing." She snapped, "Stop lying." I cooked. I waited. I believed, I said. She clapped once. "Belief doesn't pay bills." Someone near us murmured. Someone filmed. "Give me time." I said, "I can change." Evan laughed. "Time's expensive." Lily said, "Listen carefully. I'm embarrassed by you." My chest tightened. "Then why stay?" "Habit," she said, "and pity." I said, "I loved you." She shrugged. "Love is a luxury." I felt small. "Please don't do this here." She raised her voice. "I want everyone to hear. He's a burden." Evan added, "Facts hurt." I said, "I'm not nothing." Lily smiled. "Prove it." I searched faces. No help came. I said, "Remember the hospital nights?" She rolled her eyes. "Manipulation." I said, "I held your hand." She said, "You held me back." Evan checked his watch. "We're late." Lily kissed his cheek. "One more thing." She turned to me. "Don't call me again." I said, "Lily." She cut me off. Useless. The word landed hard. I felt anger rise, then drown. I said, "I hope you're happy." She said, "I already am." They walked away together. I stood there, shaking. A barista asked, "Sir, are you okay?" I nodded. "I'll go." As I stepped outside, rain hit my face. I thought I failed. I thought I trusted wrong. I thought I survived. I told myself, "Stand up." My legs moved anyway. Behind me, laughter returned. Ahead of me, silence waited. I walked into it. I stopped near the door when Lily called, "Oh, and the jacket?" I turned. "What?" "The one I bought you," she said. "Leave it." I said, "It was a gift." Evan smirked. "Gifts get returned." I slid it off. "Fine." A woman whispered, "That's harsh." Lily said, "Mind your business." I said, "You don't have to be cruel." She said, "Cruel is honest." I asked, "Was any of it real?" She sighed. "Real enough to get by." I said, "You planned this." She said, "I planned my future." Evan said, "And you're not in it." I said, "You used me." Lily said, "You volunteered." I said, "I trusted you." She said, "That's on you." My hands shook. "I never cheated." She laughed. "Low bar." I said, "I never quit." She said, "You never started." Evan said, "Let it go." I said, "I carried boxes for your move." She said, "Stop keeping score." I said, "You asked me to wait." She said, "Waiting is easy." I said, "I believed in us." She said, belief isn't skill. I said, I can learn. She said, too slow. Evan said, security matters. I said, so does loyalty. Lily said, loyalty to failure is stupid. I swallowed. Say it once more. She leaned close. Useless. My ears rang. A man said, damn. A chair scraped. I said, I won't forget this. Lily said, you'll be fine. Evan said, or not. I stepped back. I deserve respect. She said, earn it. I said, I will. She laughed. Sure. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in. I said, goodbye. She didn't answer. I stood outside, counting breaths. I said to myself, breathe. I said, don't look back. Forward. I woke up to my phone buzzing. My boss said, don't come in anymore. I said, is this about yesterday? He said, it's about performance. I said, I can explain. He said, we're done. The call ended. I sat on the edge of the bed and said, okay. The room felt smaller. I called my landlord. He said, rent's late again. I said, give me 1 week. He said, you said that last time. I said, please. He said, be out by Friday. I said, understood. The line went dead. I stared at the wall and heard Lily's voice. You're useless. I covered my ears. I said, stop. The words didn't stop. I packed 2 bags and went to Mark's place. Mark opened the door and said, rough night? I said, I won't stay long. He said, couch is yours. I said, thanks. Days passed. Mark said, any leads? I said, nothing yet. He said, you eat today? I said, later. He said, that's what you said yesterday. I said, I'm fine. He looked away. On the 4th night, he said, my girlfriend's moving in. I said, I get it. He said, I'm sorry. I said, you helped enough. I walked out before he could reply. Rain started. I walked with no plan. I said to myself, just keep moving. My stomach growled. My head replayed the café. Useless. Burden. I laughed and said, funny. My legs gave out near a closed shop. I sat on the sidewalk. I said, this is it. A voice said, bad night? I looked up. An older man stood under an umbrella. I said, you shouldn't stop. He said, I already did. I said, I'm fine. He said, you're soaked. I said, so is the city. He smiled. Name's Howard. I said, I didn't ask. He said, I know. He offered a napkin. I said, I don't want charity. He said, good. I said, why help? He said, because you're breathing. I laughed. Barely. He said, sit up. I tried. I failed. He held my arm. I said, don't. He said, easy. I said, I'm not worth it. He said, stop deciding that. I said, everyone else did. He said, everyone else isn't here. Rain hit harder. He said, talk. I said, about what? He said, why you're shaking. I said, I lost everything. He said, details. I said, Job, home, her. He said, her hurts most. I nodded. She called me useless. He said, "Do you believe it?" I said, "I hear it." He said, "That's not an answer." I said, "I don't know anymore." He sat beside me. He said, "I've been there." I said, "You don't know me." He said, "I know pain." I said, "Pain doesn't pay rent." He said, "Neither does pride." I sighed. I didn't ask for this. He said, "No one does." I said, "I failed." He said, "You're still standing." I laughed. Barely. He said, "That counts." I said, "Why are you listening?" He said, "Because no one listened to me once." I swallowed. I don't want pity. He said, "I don't give it." I looked at him. Then what? He said, "A chance." I said, "For what?" He said, "To not end tonight." I stared at the rain. I said, "I'm tired." He said, "Then rest." I said, "Where?" He said, "Let's start dry." He stood and offered his hand. I hesitated. He said, "Your choice." I took it. My chest loosened. I said, "Thank you." He said, "You're welcome." I followed him into the light. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. "I've got a job for you," Mr. Blake said, leaning back in his chair. I frowned. "I don't have any experience in logistics." He shrugged. "Neither did anyone when they started. You're desperate, right?" I swallowed. "I guess, yes." He nodded. "Then show up tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late." I said, Okay. Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just work." The next morning, I walked into a cluttered warehouse, boxes stacked haphazardly. I muttered, "This is smaller than I imagined." A foreman yelled, "Hey, watch the crates!" I jumped back. "Sorry, first day." Mr. Blake's voice called, "Ignore the noise. Focus on moving." I lifted boxes heavier than I expected. "This is insane." A coworker laughed. "You'll get used to it, or quit." I said, "I'm not quitting." Hours passed. I dropped something again. I can't. I'm useless." Mr. Blake walked over. "Stop saying that." I said, "It's true." He looked me in the eye. "Not here. Not ever. Say it again, and you're gone." I nodded, biting my lip. "Okay." Later, during a break, Mr. Blake asked, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "I need to survive. I have nowhere else." He said, "Good. Then learn." I shook my head. "Learn what?" "Discipline," he said. "Patience. Silence. Stop seeking applause. Stop waiting for validation." I frowned. "Silence?" "Yes. Focus on work. Don't look for praise. It will come if you're good." I said, "I've never been disciplined." "Then start now." Weeks passed. I failed at loading schedules, miscounted shipments, forgot forms. Every time, Mr. Blake said, "Again, better this time." I said, "I can't." He said, "You can, or leave." Slowly, I learned. Slowly, I stopped shaking every time someone yelled. One afternoon, Sarah Miller walked in. "You're the new guy?" she asked, flipping a folder. "Yes," I said, awkward. "That's me." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't care about your past. Mistakes cost money here. Don't make them." I said, "I won't." She said, "We'll see." Over the next weeks, she corrected my forms. "You forgot the invoice date again," she said. I said, "I'm sorry. I'll fix it." She said, "Sorry doesn't count. Accuracy does." Pay attention. I said, I am paying attention. She said, then act like it. Stop whining. I bit back. I'm not whining. She smirked. You are. Fix it. Her honesty stung, but I started learning faster. I asked questions. I listened. I stopped needing praise for small wins. Sarah kept pushing me, but it built me. One evening, Mr. Blake called me aside. You're standing taller, he said. I said, I don't feel it yet. Don't think about it, he said. Feel it. Don't chase revenge. Survive. That's enough for now. I nodded. Inside, I whispered, never again. Never let anyone call me useless. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could keep that promise. Mr. Blake says you're ready for tonight, my assistant said, handing me a tie. I adjusted it. I've been ready. She smirked. You say that every time. Remember last year? I laughed lightly. That was different. Different, she repeated, rolling her eyes. I nodded. Let's go. The event hall was bright, full of laughter and chatter. I shook hands, smiled, nodded. I recognized faces, remembered names, corrected mistakes silently. Power had a quiet weight. A woman's laugh caught my attention. My stomach tightened. I turned. Lily. She didn't see me at first. She was talking to someone tall, confident. I said under my breath, that's her. She laughed again. I froze for a second. My mind flashed to the café, the word useless. Then she looked up. Her eyes widened. A smile formed, then froze. I said nothing. I didn't move. Evan stood next to her. Sleek suit, polished shoes, hand in hers. He looked successful, but his jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the crowd nervously. I whispered, so that's him. Lily's voice caught. I didn't wait to hear. I walked on. She said, wait. I paused, glanced over my shoulder. Hello, Lily. She blinked, confused. It can't be. I said, it's me. Evan stepped forward. Who's this? I said calmly, someone from your past. Lily's mouth opened, closed. I didn't recognize you. I said, I'm not the same man you knew. She swallowed. You look different. I nodded slightly. I had to become someone else, for myself. Evan said, I don't like your tone. I said, I'm not here to talk to you. Lily said softly, I never imagined. I said, imagine what? That I'd survive? That I'd thrive? She hesitated. I cut in. You don't have to say anything. Her eyes searched mine, trying to find the boy she left behind. There was no boy, just a man standing taller, calmer, controlled. I felt no anger, no longing, just clarity. I said, I hope you're well. She whispered, I said, no explanations needed. Evan's fists clenched slightly. We should go. I said, go. She looked like she wanted to speak again, but the words died on her lips. I stepped back. My pulse was steady, my mind clear. I walked toward the exit. Wait, she said again. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Outside, the cool night hit my face. I breathed in, steady. The city lights reflected on wet pavement. I whispered, years of pain, and I'm still here. A cab honked. I walked past, ignoring it. Inside, laughter and music continued. I left it behind. I said to myself, I've changed. I repeated it silently. I am no longer the man she could reach. I am no longer the man I feared I was. My phone buzzed. Mr. Blake's message. Astersh, well done. Handle yourself with calm. Remember, patience is power. I smiled faintly. Calm, I whispered. I continued walking, alone, but not lonely. My reflection in a glass door showed a man in control. No resentment, no chasing approval, only a quiet certainty. I said under my breath, fate has started working on its own. I slowed, inhaled deep, and let the moment settle. Behind me, the event carried on. Laughter, chatter, applause. I left it all behind. I didn't feel joy nor anger. I felt complete. I said quietly, this is the version of me no one recognized before, and I'm not turning back. The street was empty, the night still. I walked forward, and that was enough. My phone buzzed. Hi, can we meet? It's been a long time. I stared at her name. Lily. My chest tightened. I typed back, why? Seconds later, her reply, I just want to talk. I said aloud, talk? After all this time? I met her at a small café. She waved, smiling nervously. Hey. I said, hey. She laughed softly. You look different. I said, I've been told that. Her eyes flicked around, avoiding mine. I'm sorry for back then, publicly, mean, everything. I said, you sound rehearsed. She winced. Maybe I am. I regret it. I said nothing. I sipped my coffee. She asked, how have you been? Really? I said, busy, successful, surviving. She leaned forward. You don't seem angry. I said, I'm not here to be angry. She said, it's just, Evan, I can't control him. He's reckless. He's in debt. I thought I could manage, but I can't. I said, I see. She bit her lip. I know I hurt you. I didn't know what I was doing. I said slowly, you knew exactly what you were doing. She said softly, I thought it was survival. I thought I had to choose. I said, and what about loyalty or trust? She looked down. I chose wrong. I shook my head slightly. I didn't need to hear this. She said, but I want you to know. I see it now. Everything I threw away. Everything I didn't appreciate. I said, and you want what from me? Forgiveness? She said, maybe a chance to start over if you'll let me. I almost laughed. Start over? Yes, she whispered. If we could, maybe try again. I know it's a lot to ask. I said, do you hear yourself? After all the humiliation? She said, I know. I'm different now. I said, are you or just scared? She flinched. Both? I leaned back. Sarah warned me. Said I shouldn't reopen old wounds. She blinked. Who's Sarah? I said, someone who keeps me sane. She nodded slowly. And Mr. Blake? I said, he says karma works best when you don't interfere. She frowned. So, you're letting it happen on its own? I said, I don't know if it's strength or cowardice. She said, I don't want to be the cause of your pain anymore. I said, too late for that. You already were. She swallowed. I never stopped thinking about you. I said, didn't you? She looked down. I tried, but I was trapped in my own choices. I said, you always had the option to choose differently. She whispered, I didn't know better. I said, words, empty unless backed by actions. She said, I know. I hoped talking to you would mean something. I paused, staring into my coffee. It does in one way. I understand you now, but that doesn't mean I go back. She said softly, almost pleading, Can we start fresh, please? I said, I can't. I've built myself. I've survived, and I can't let you undo that. Her eyes glistened. I understand. I just hope, I said gently. Some things can't be repaired, only learned from. She nodded, tears threatening to fall. I'm sorry, truly. I said, I know. We sat in silence. Around us, life continued. Her regret hung heavy, mine steady. I whispered to myself, I survived, and I won't let anyone take that away again. I stood. I should go. She nodded, voice barely audible. Take care of yourself. I said, you too. I walked out, leaving her with her words. The wind hit my face. I inhaled deep, realizing that silence, not revenge, was my power tonight. My phone buzzed. Please, I need your help. I read the message. Lily. My chest tightened, but I stayed still. I typed back, what now? Seconds later, her reply, Astastic 87. He's in trouble. I don't know what to do. You're the only one who can fix this. I set the phone down. I whispered, I can't. It rang again. I answered, hello. Her voice trembled. Please, I know I hurt you. I know. But you have to help him. He's losing everything, and I can't. Please. I said calmly, I'm not helping him. There was a pause. Then, but I thought, I cut in. We are not that anymore. She sniffled. I remember everything you did for me. For us. Don't you care? I said, I cared then. I care about me now. But, she stammered, he's dangerous. He'll destroy everything if you don't stop him. I said softly, let him destroy it. You don't understand, she gasped. You could save me. Save us. I said firmly, I don't save people who chose to hurt me. Why? She whispered, voice breaking. Why can't you help me? I said, because I've moved on, and you can't change the past. She choked a sob. I didn't know how to. I said, you knew. That's why I walked away. You don't get to rewrite it now. Please, she begged. I thought you'd be different. I thought you'd still care. I said, I care about myself. That's all that matters now. Her silence was loud. I could hear her struggling to breathe. I added, it's not revenge. I'm not punishing you. I'm just telling the truth. I've survived. You can't touch me anymore. She whispered, I never realized. I said, you didn't realize I had strength until it was gone from your reach. There was another pause. Then she said quietly, I can't believe this. You're different. I said, yes, I am different. I am no longer the man you could control. She choked on a sob. I thought I had power over you. I said calmly, you never did. You only imagined it. Her voice cracked. I don't know what to say. I said, you don't have to. The truth is enough. Evan's name lingered in my mind, the shadow he still cast. She pleaded for me to save him, begged, reminded me of our nights together, my loyalty, my sacrifices. I said firmly, I remember all of it. That's why I can't help you. I won't be dragged into the past again. She whispered, I never thought you'd. I said, you never thought because you never cared enough to see me. Another long pause. I could hear her shaking on the line. I said, I'm walking away, and I won't look back. Wait, she began. I said, no, I've made my choice. My life is mine. You've lost that power. Silence. I hung up. My chest tightened, but not with anger, not with triumph, only relief. I said quietly, this is freedom. This is control. This is what I needed all along. Outside, the city lights blurred in the rain. I breathed in, steady. I whispered, I choose me. I walked into the night, leaving her words behind. Her fear, her realization that she could no longer manipulate me. It weighed heavier than any victory I could have claimed with revenge. I smiled faintly. Truth hurts more than anger. My footsteps echoed against wet pavement. I whispered again, I am not hers to touch. I am not anyone's to break. The street stretched ahead, empty. I walked forward, calm, untouchable, and free. I heard the news over the phone. Evan's company just declared bankruptcy, my assistant said. I said quietly, I see. She looked at me. Aren't you happy? I shook my head. No. Relief. Nothing else. She frowned. Relief? I said, yes. No joy in someone else's failure. Only peace in moving on. She nodded slowly. That's mature. I said, mature or necessary. Later, I saw Lily's name trending online. A friend said, rumors say she lost everything with Evan. I said calmly, I know. I'm watching from a distance. He asked, do you want revenge? I laughed softly. Revenge? No, that's cheap. He looked surprised. You're not smiling? I said, I don't need to. Watching her struggle. It's not victory. It's life balancing itself. Sarah called me that evening. I saw the news. You okay? I said, I'm better than okay. I'm free. She said, free? I said, free from the past version of me. The boy who begged for love is gone. She laughed. Finally, took long enough. I said, it took being crushed to see it. She said, and staying human, that's harder than revenge. I smiled faintly. Exactly. Later, Mr. Blake called. I saw. Evan's empire is down. I said, yes, I'm watching. He said, you feel satisfied? I said, relieved. That's all. I don't want her destroyed, just accountable to reality. He chuckled. Accountability, yes. Survival is the true revenge. Remember that. I said, I do. I've learned it firsthand. He said, you've let go of anger. That's progress. I said, anger served its purpose. Now I serve myself. He laughed. Good. Never forget that. The next day, I walked past the old café. Memories surfaced. I whispered, I was powerless there. Not anymore. A barista smiled. You look different. I said, I feel different. She nodded. Life's funny that way. I said, yes, karma has its own timing. I checked my phone. News outlets reported doors closing for Lily. She appeared on television, nervous, trying to explain financial missteps. I said softly, not my doing. Life caught up. Sarah called again. You're calm? Proud? I said, calm, yes. Proud, maybe. Not for her downfall, for staying human. She said, wise choice. Most would have cheered. I said, I survived. That's my true victory. Anything else is noise. I walked to my office. Colleagues noticed the change in me. Confidence, yes, but quiet. Focused. Unshaken. A junior asked, do you feel satisfaction? I said, satisfaction is fleeting. Peace is permanent. He nodded, thoughtful. I get it now. That night, I called Mr. Blake. You were right. Survival is the greatest revenge. He said, and you didn't even lift a finger to hurt her. I said, I didn't need to. I grew beyond that. He said, good. The boy who begged for love is gone. The man you've become is unstoppable. I smiled. looking out the window. Yes, gone. I whispered to myself, no more chasing approval. No more depending on others. Only me. Only my life. Only what I control. The rain fell softly outside, cleansing the city streets. I felt lighter, unburdened. I said quietly, karma works, but peace is earned. Sarah texted, well done. I replied, not done with life yet. I laughed softly. No, just getting started. I leaned back, closing my eyes. The boy who begged, who craved love and validation, he had died. The man who survived, who stood tall without apology, he was here. And for the first time, I felt complete. I heard the news over the phone. Evan's company just declared bankruptcy, my assistant said. I said quietly, I see. She looked at me. Aren't you happy? I shook my head. No. Relief. Nothing else. She frowned. Relief? I said, yes. No joy in someone else's failure. Only peace in moving on. She nodded slowly. That's mature. I said, mature or necessary. Later, I saw Lily's name trending online. A friend said, rumors say she lost everything with Evan. I said calmly, I know. He asked, do you want revenge? I'm watching from a distance. I laughed softly. Revenge? No, that's cheap. He looked surprised. You're not smiling? I said, I don't need to. Watching her struggle, it's not victory. It's life balancing itself. Sarah called me that evening. I saw the news. You okay? I said, I'm better than okay. I'm free. She said, free? I said, free from the past version of me. The boy who begged for love is gone. She laughed. Finally, took long enough. I said, it took being crushed to see it. She said, and staying human, that's harder than revenge. I smiled faintly. Exactly. Later, Mr. Blake called. I saw. Evan's empire is down. I said, yes, I'm watching. He said, you feel satisfied? I said, relieved. That's all. I don't want her destroyed, just accountable to reality. He chuckled. Accountability, yes. Survival is the true revenge. Remember that. I said, I do. I've learned it firsthand. He said, you've let go of anger. That's progress. I said, anger served its purpose. Now I serve myself. He laughed. Good. Never forget that. The next day, I walked past the old café. Memories surfaced. I whispered, I was powerless there. Not anymore. A barista smiled. You look different. I said, I feel different. She nodded. Life's funny that way. I said, yes, karma has its own timing. I checked my phone. News outlets reported doors closing for Lily. She appeared on television, nervous, trying to explain financial missteps. I said softly, not my doing. Life caught up. Sarah called again. You're calm? Proud? I said, calm, yes. Proud, maybe. Not for her downfall, for staying human. She said, wise choice. Most would have cheered. I said, I survived. That's my true victory. Anything else is noise. I walked to my office. Colleagues noticed the change in me. Confidence, yes, but quiet, focused, unshaken. A junior asked, do you feel satisfaction? I said, satisfaction is fleeting. Peace is permanent. He nodded, thoughtful. I get it now. That night, I called Mr. Blake. You were right. Survival is the greatest revenge. He said, and you didn't even lift a finger to hurt her. I said I didn't need to. I grew beyond that. He said, good. The boy who begged for love is gone. The man you've become is unstoppable. I smiled, looking out the window. Yes, gone. I whispered to myself, no more chasing approval. No more depending on others. Only me. Only my life. Only what I control. The rain fell softly outside, cleansing the city streets. I felt lighter, unburdened. I said quietly, karma works, but peace is earned. Sarah texted, well done, I replied. Not done with life yet, I laughed softly. No, just getting started. I leaned back, closing my eyes. The boy who begged, who craved love and validation, he had died. The man who survived, who stood tall without apology, he was here. And for the first time, I felt complete. My phone buzzed. I'd like to meet one last time, Lily's text read. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed, okay. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. She was already there, eyes red, hands fidgeting. I said softly, hello, Lily. She looked up, startled. You came. I nodded. I did. You wanted one last meeting. She whispered, I don't know what to say. I said, you don't have to say anything. She looked down at her hands. I've been crying. I said, I can see that. Her voice trembled. I ruined everything. You deserved better. I said quietly, I forgave you a long time ago. She blinked. Forgave me? I nodded. Not for you. For me. For my peace. She swallowed. I thought I destroyed you. I said calmly, you didn't. You revealed me. Everything I was. Everything I could be. You just pulled the mask off. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. I never realized. I said, it's okay. You don't need to realize anything now. I've moved on. She whispered, I wanted to make it right. I shook my head. Some things don't need to be made right. They need to be understood. She cried softly. I was selfish. I hurt you. I said, yes, you did. But that was your choice. My growth wasn't dependent on your apology. She sniffled. I thought I'd never see you again. I didn't know. I said, you never controlled my path. I chose it myself. Every step after the cafe was mine to take. She hesitated. Do you hate me? I shook my head. Hate is heavy. I don't carry it. I let go long ago. I felt it, sure. But now, I feel complete. She whispered, I can't believe you say that. I said, believe it. I'm not standing here broken. I'm standing here whole. She sniffled again. I wanted to tell you I'm sorry for everything. I said, I heard you, and I accept it. That's enough for me. I don't need more. Silence fell between us. It wasn't awkward. It was necessary. I said quietly, you didn't make me weak. You didn't define me. You just exposed who I already was, strong enough to survive. She nodded slowly, tears still rolling. I see now. I said, good. That's all I ask. Understand, not beg for forgiveness. That's yours to give, if you ever can. But it doesn't change me. She sniffled, her voice almost a whisper. I never meant for this to happen. I said, intentions don't erase outcomes. I accept what happened because it shaped me. Nothing more, nothing less. She nodded again. You truly forgive me. I said softly, I forgave myself first. You were just part of the lesson. She wiped her eyes. I thank you. Truly. I stood, collecting my coat. Take care of yourself, Lily. She looked up. Will you ever? I smiled faintly. I'm done with the past. My life is here. My work. The people who stayed. That's enough for me. She nodded silently. Goodbye. I said, Goodbye, Lily. Walking out of the cafe, the air felt lighter than I remembered. The rain had stopped, and the city smelled of wet asphalt and possibility. I whispered to myself, I am complete. I am free. My phone buzzed with messages from Sarah, from colleagues. They mattered. They were real. I said softly, my worth. It never came from her acceptance. It came from me. I walked forward, calm, confident, unshaken. The boy who begged for love was gone. The man I became smiled faintly, and for the first time, I didn't need anyone else to validate that.